Hey everybody, it's Sean Price with the Price and Price Group of Sampson Properties, and we can begin our countdown now. Kelly is going to be joining us here in about hopefully 2 or 3 weeks. She will be back in so that we will be able to start doing our full-on market reports again. She has been swamped. She's got some surprises that are coming, and so she is almost finished with it. She's been doing a lot of prepping and a lot of studying, so just bear with us. She will be back hopefully by the end of March. So this is time for this week's buyer market snapshot. What has happened in the Northern Virginia real estate market in the last 7 days? Probably in about 15 minutes because we got the month stats to go over as well. Here we go. Okay, buyers, so if you're listening to anybody who is familiar with what's going on in the Northern Virginia real estate market, you know that that the spring has sprung. We just had our Platinum Mastermind with our brokerage here, which is the top producers of our brokerage, Sampson Properties, and there were about 60 of us in that room, and report after report after report, especially here in Northern Virginia, was properties going on the market. They had properties that had previously expired in the last, end of last year, going on the market and getting multiple offers in the first weekend. So buyers, you've got to be ready, you've got to be competitive, you've got to make sure that your agent is prepared to navigate a competitive market while at the same time protecting you and your interests. So let's dive into what's going on in the market and why I'm saying that. So we're going to go over two different types of reports. The first thing is going to be our market snapshot. These are our lead measures. These are the numbers that you're going to use for your real-time decisions. These are things from the demand side. This is properties that went under contract in the last 7 days. From the supply side, it's properties that came on the market in the last 7 days. So that's going to give us our supply versus demand ratio so that you know how to respond appropriately. And we're going to show you how that's actually affecting the contracts that came in over the last 7 days as well. Then when we go over the monthly market report, we're going over more of the bird's eye picture. We're going over what has happened in the month of February, so we can see how that compared to February of 2025. And what you'll see there is that gives us an overall trend of where the market might be going. But you can't make real-time decisions based on that because that data can be as high as 75 to 90 days old, depending on when it comes out and so on. So we're using lead data for our real-time decisions, lag data or sold data for our trend observations. Okay, so let's get into the numbers and let's look at what is going on the last 7 days. So as always, our black line is going to be our demand. That's going to be our buyer activity. It's going to be the number of contracts that number of properties that went under contract in the last 7 days. And you can see we had another sharp increase. Our teal line here is going to be our inventory. You can see that we had sort of flatlined. We're on an upward trajectory, but we had sort of flatlined for a few weeks. Well, we took a nice step upwards as we entered into March this last 7 days as well. So our buyer activity and our inventory is up higher. If you look at this time last year, buyer activity is here, buyer activity was down here. So we're a little bit higher on buyer activity, and same thing on inventory. The inventory is here, it was down here, so we're slightly higher on inventory. So the market is slightly more active. The key here is that you can see that this gap right here, the gap between supply and demand, it did shrink. Last week we were this big, this week we came down a little bit because of that influx of inventory. So what does that do with the strength of the buyer's market versus the seller's market? Well, if you go down to our graph down here, this gray line is a normal market. Anything above the gray line is considered a seller's market. Anything below that is going to be a buyer's market. You can see that we were on an upward trend into that seller's market, and you can see we did dip down just a little bit because of the influx in inventory. So what do I think is going to happen next week? I think that buyer activity is going to shoot up even higher because buyer activity tends to lag a little bit behind inventory, because if there's no inventory to buy, then the buyers can't put things under contract. But since we had that influx of inventory in the last 7 days, I think our buyer activity this week is going to go up quite significantly. So basically what we're looking at for buyers is a strong seller's market. What this means for you is you've got to be, again, competitive. You've got to have your ducks in a row. You've got to have the strongest pre-approval you can, even potentially a pre-offer full approval. You've got to have your inspector lined up so you can protect yourself with regards to that. Be prepared to go into contracts without inspection contingencies. Speaking of contingencies, let's look and see what happened with the actual contracts. So you can see, and we're going to focus on Virginia here, you can see that 68% of the properties went at or above list price. 37% of them went in higher than list price, and 31% went under list price. You can see that 48% of the properties, almost half of the properties, went under contract in the first 7 days. So that market is heating up. And then 71% of the properties went under contract within 21 days. The ones that stayed because they were priced too high or not priced right for their condition, those that stayed are the ones that most likely went under asking price. So if you're looking at properties and they're in that first 21 days of being on the market, as a buyer, you've got to be prepared to pay at least asking price, possibly higher. So just be ready for that. Financing versus cash is really insignificant, but there were 17% of the offers were cash offers. Contingencies, here we go. So we've been seeing the finance contingencies in Virginia. About 3/4 of the buyers were getting them. You can see that they dropped significantly this time because there was multiple offers, so the buyers start waiving these contingencies. If you have to waive your finance contingencies, there are ways to make sure that you are totally protected. If your agent does not know how to do that, reach out to us. We can help guide you through the process. Appraisal contingency is also dropping. That's been sitting at about 3/4 to 80%, 75 to 80% getting them. We're now down to 60% getting that appraisal contingency. Again, because when you're in multiple offer situations, there's going to be a buyer in there that's going to waive all of their contingencies, especially when you get to home inspection. We're down to almost half and half now. We've been sitting up nicely in the 60 to 70 to 75, 80% of buyers getting their home inspections, but we've been seeing that number backing off the last 3 weeks, and here we go, we're even lower now. We're at 53%. So you've got to be prepared. I know buyers that will not buy a property without a home inspection. That's fair, but if you want to compete in this market, you're going to have to figure out, and there is a way to do this, you're going to have to figure out how to get that home inspection, but at the same time submit your offer inspection contingency free so that you can compete. So make sure you know how to do that. Contract to close, a small percentage went within 10 to 15 days. The vast majority went 16 to 30 days, with some going 31 to 60 days. And then lastly, the commissions. We had 98% of these contracts had buyer agent commissions being contributed, the seller contributing to buyer agent commissions. So as a buyer, be sure that your agent is negotiating on your behalf with that aspect as well to try to get that covered for you if possible. Now, it can be a little bit hairy when you're out there and you're in multiple offer situations, because the important thing is to the seller is how much money they net. So if it's important to you to have your buyer agent commission covered by the seller, you have to make sure that your offer reflects that in a way that it's worth it to the seller to contribute to that. Okay, if you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to us. If you are a buyer and you don't have an agent, or you would just like us to sit down with you and kind of review your situation with you, whether you want to use Kelly and myself or not, we'd be happy to sit down with you and go over a strategy session to help you get prepared for this market, teach you how to survive and how to compete in this market while at the same time protecting yourself, and how to negotiate with your lenders to get yourself the best interest rate possible. Be happy to do that at no charge. The number for that would be 703-783-2143, and we will see you guys on next week's Market Snapshot. Be safe out there and good luck. Hey everybody, it's Sean Price with the Price and Price Group, and the numbers are in. We've got the February 26 numbers, so we can compare them to the February 25 numbers to see how the market is moving and what the trend is. Let's dive into it. Okay, so we're going to dive into the month-over-month stats from 2025 versus 2024, so we can compare and see, is the market moving in a growing, an increasing transaction, a seller's market, or are we seeing tendencies where we may start seeing prices start come down? What are we going to see? Well, let's go ahead and just dive into it. All right, so the number of new listings was actually down 13.4% compared to the February of 2025. So we had 958 listings in February 2026, and we had 1106 in February 2025. What's important about that is if you go over here and you look at the number of sales, you'll see that the number of sales were up 4.4%. So the amount of inventory was down, but the number of sales were up, which means there was more demand than there was supply in this given month. So that tends to be more towards a market where prices are again starting to trend up, and we're starting to see a stronger demand versus supply ratio. Days on market, 28 days for February of 2026 versus 24 days February 2025. So properties have been sitting on the market a little bit longer this past season, but you can see that we're starting to catch up. We're starting to get closer. So we'll see what happens in March. Months of inventory stayed exactly the same. This is our absorption rate, and the absorption rate means that if no more properties came on the market and we continue to sell properties at the same speed that we've been selling them in the last month, then how long would it take for all of the inventory to be eaten up? And that number is 3 months. A normal market is considered to be around 5 to 6 months. A buyer's market is anything above 6 months. A seller's market is anything below that 5-month mark. So we are in a seller's market. We have been consistently, but it feels like we're getting back into a stronger seller's market at this point. And then finally, what is the median sales price? What did that sales price do? Interestingly enough, it actually went down a little bit. Ignore this January 2025. I forgot to change that. It's supposed to be February 2025. But sales price went down 1.4% from 742.5 in February of 2025 to 732.5 in February 2026. Now, I've gone over this multiple times, like what the median sales price means. This does not mean that your values are going down. This does not mean that home property values are dropping. It does not tell us anything about the value of an individual property. What this tells us is that of the sampling in February of 2026, the number that fell right smack dab in the middle was 732,500, which is down from the number that fell right smack dab in the middle in February of 2025. So properties themselves, you have to look at it individually. And I say this both when the price goes up or the price goes down. This is just a good way of us tracking to see what the trend is, but don't take 1 month in and of itself and use it as a comparable number. Let's just keep an eye on this. Let's see what happens. But we do know that the market itself is picking up in activity, and we're starting to see a lot of competition entering the market again. So we'll stay on top of this and see what happens in March. Okay, if you guys have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to us. And if not, then we will see you our next month's monthly market report. And just remember that right now it is March 6th as I'm shooting this video, and the market's going crazy and we're seeing multiple offers. So it is chaotic out there. Make sure you're watching the weekly snapshot so that you know how to make real-time decisions that will work for you so that you can navigate this market successfully, either as a buyer or a seller. All right, have a great day out there, or a great week or a great month, and we'll see you next time.